doomers need to just go away. They're not helpful, they're not honest, and they're not accurate. The reality is that we have a much more realistic pro-family, pro-life, cultural agenda and movement than we've ever had. I think for decades, what we were happy with as social conservatives was being lied to, right? We've had a pro-life amendment in the platform for decades. And where has that gone? Absolutely nowhere. But Donald Trump comes out of nowhere, becomes, the president and overturns Roe like the next day, essentially. We had worked so hard to get Roe v. Wade overturned, and President Trump was the first president to do that.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it is just me. I'm hoping to bring Nick back to you guys soon. He actually has had his baby, very thematically appropriate given our topic today. Nicholas Sawyer Solheim Jr. was born a couple of days ago, healthy, bouncing baby boy. Please send him congratulations. You can find a picture on his Twitter. I guessed that would be the name, and he told me I was wrong a couple of weeks ago. So I'm feeling very vindicated by that. But today we had on a really great friend to American Moment since the very beginning, Terry Schilling, who's the president of the American Principles Project. He is responsible for developing and implementing APP's strategy, messaging, and political activity at a state and federal level. He's been with that organization for, I guess, almost a decade now, and has just been taking it to brand new heights via their C4, their C3, their Super PAC, and so much more. We kind of checked in with Terry about the state of social conservatism today in the United States. Things are a little bit complicated. It's not quite the environment we were in 2 years ago. We had a tough conversation about what's the state of the pro-life movement and what exactly is reasonable to expect in terms of political change there. And then a lot of very optimistic and exciting news about how they're fighting back against the transgender industry, what they're doing in order to protect children from pornography online, and the future of how we, have a pro-family legislative agenda across the country. So it was a fascinating discussion. You can check it out. You can check out the entire backlog of our podcast at AmericanMoment.org, as well as any programs we have upcoming. If you'd like to get involved here in Washington, D.C., it's a very good season to do so. So fill out our form at AmericanMoment.org/join. You can join us for our fall lecture series on Capitol Hill, AM Fridays, where we do kind of how to be America First 101 style lectures on all the issues that matter and so much more. We're excited, as always, to have yet another episode for you guys. So we'll go now to Terry Schilling. Terry, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Saurabh.
We always like to hear, especially during election season, what the state of social conservatism is in this country. I think right now there is a lot of doomerism coming from certain sectors of the right that we are now in a post-social conservative Republican Party and conservative movement, that those issues have completely gone by the wayside, and that there is no cause for optimism. What say you? How should we be thinking about the state of social conservatism in the GOP and in the conservative movement today? Well,
I think doomers need to just go away. They're not helpful, they're not honest, and they're not accurate. The reality is that we have a much more realistic pro-family, pro-life, cultural agenda and movement than we've ever had. I think for decades, what we were happy with as social conservatives was being lied to, right? We've had a pro-life amendment in the platform for decades, and where has that gone? Absolutely nowhere. But Donald Trump comes out of nowhere, becomes, the president and overturns Roe like the next day, essentially. We had worked so hard to get Roe v. Wade overturned, and President Trump was the first president to do that. And I understand that there's been some heartburn over changes that he made to the platform, but the reality is that it's a much smarter platform. It includes the 14th Amendment protections, which is vitally important. Look, I was the second person to sign on endorsing the pro-life, pro-family language in the platform. It's robust, it's strong, but most importantly, it's honest. It's honest about what we can do at the national and federal level. The problem is that the Senate has been holding up even a modest 15-week limits. Right. And if we are going to be honest with the voters, which I think is important, we have to tell them what we want to do at the federal level in the federal platform. And what the platform says is that we're going to protect the unborn at the late stages. We're going to have late term abortion bans, and we're going to protect them with the 14th Amendment. It's very important to do that. It's how we go on offense. How I've been looking at this is everywhere, ever since Dobbs, everywhere where abortion's been on the ballot, we have gotten our clocks clean. When voters have to choose between all abortions or no abortions, they're choosing all abortions. So we have to change the conversation and the choices between all abortions and some abortions. That's how we move the needle back our way, and that's how we get back on our feet and back on offense. Regarding the other aspects of the platform and the status and the state of the pro-family movement, it's incredibly strong. We've gotten 25 states to protect girls' sports, 25 states to ban these horrific and permanent and harmful gender mutilation surgeries. And the coolest thing is that years ago, they had declared the fight to protect children online from porn to be dead. We're now up to 19 states, Saurabh, that are protecting kids from porn online with age verification. The movement for the pro-family movement anyway is alive and well. We're winning and we're making it political. That has been the thing that's been missing. The political investments, making politicians pay a price when they hurt our kids, when they take away parental rights. That has been missing for some time. The pro-family movement pulled out of the game. They pulled out of campaigns and elections, and they focused on the culture, which is important, but it's not the only game in town. Politics is part of the culture.
Well, the culture or the courts, those are the two vehicles that you could do anything. I want to dive into each and every one of those issues where you believe there's cause for optimism, but just talking about the macro a little bit some more, I find this distinction between honesty and dishonesty when it comes to our federal imagination to be really interesting, because I can see from a certain vantage point why a social conservative activist might be upset. For many years, Republican politicians paid lip service to a maximalist view on, say, abortion and a couple of other issues. And now they're not doing that anymore. And so it feels like we've retrenched. It feels like we've lost ground. But you're saying that that's not true because that was always false, and that the public language now reflects governing reality much more closely. Can you just talk a little bit more about what those dynamics are and how, you're assuaging your activists and the people you work with on those issues?
Yeah, listen, the reality is that the choice in this election couldn't be more stark. On the Democrat side of the aisle, we have a full-fledged abortion movement ready to go. They want to pass the Freedom of Choice Act, or whatever the heck they're calling it now, where abortion will be a federal right. It will strike down every single limit that we have passed and worked hard for in the states. It'll taxpayer fund abortions. You'll have the abortion pill in a dispensary in every single school across the country. It will expand. And on top of that, this Department of Justice under Kamala Harris just threw a 72-year-old grandmother in jail for not even protesting, for praying at an abortion clinic where they found 5 dead babies in the dumpster. That is the world in which we're living in, not just in where, we're not passing pro-life laws if the Democrats get into office, but where we are going to jail for praying outside of abortion clinics. We can't have that. On the other side of the aisle, we have Donald Trump, who has pledged to fight to protect babies in the womb in the latest stages where it's most politically popular. People don't understand. We don't have a monarchy in this country. We have a democracy. Others would say it's a democratic republic. Whatever it is, voters get a say, and voters get to choose who their president is. And if we don't readjust to the losses that we've had over the last several years, we're going to keep getting the same results. And that is more losses. We have to readjust our strategy. And that's what the pro-life movement's doing. We're going on offense on abortion. We aren't the extremists on abortion. The reality is we, at the federal level, the only thing that's really been discussed and entertained is limiting abortion unrestricted, to the first 15 weeks. First 15 weeks of pregnancy, you can get an abortion under the Republicans' plan for no reason or any reason at all. Mm-hmm. After that, we limit it to rape, incest, and life of the mother. That's so reasonable. And it's incredibly popular. It's got 65% support across the country. We need to be focusing where we have the majority, not where we're having to win over people and persuade them. Let's rack up the wins now and govern later.
So, one of the things that I hear a lot in circles, every time one of these ballot referenda in the states fails is, people ask, like, was the pro-life movement just not ready? There's all these organizations that have raised tens of millions of dollars over the decades, hundreds of millions of dollars. What the heck? Shouldn't they have been preparing for this day? Didn't they know that one day Roe was going to be overturned? You're both kind of an insider and an outsider to the institutional pro-life movement. APP is a much more entrepreneurial and active organization on a whole variety of issues. But you're across the hallway from at least some of them. So what do you make of that criticism that people say that the pro-life movement was just caught completely flat-footed? Is that accurate, or do you have a defense for them?
Well, first and foremost, they weren't caught flat-footed. For example, in the Ohio ballot initiative, Susan B. Anthony spent tens of millions of dollars in that, trying to win in that referendum. We weren't caught flat-footed. They spent the resources. They tried to mobilize the voters. But the reality is that 50 years of Roe v. Wade has consequences. You have a whole country that is used to having abortion on demand without exceptions. And that is what we're dealing with. It's scary right now. What's happening is the country is adjusting. We had a huge change. It was essentially an abortion revolution when we had Dobbs, and people are hearing all these crazy accusations that aren't true coming from the legacy media that, I don't know why people listen to the legacy media. It's just full of lies and propaganda nonstop. So I would say that the pro-life movement didn't get caught flat-footed. They couldn't get consensus. I will say that there are groups that don't like the 15-week limits. They want something stronger at the federal level. We need a central leader on the pro-life movement at the national stage, and Donald Trump's providing that. He's talking about limiting abortion to the earlier stages and protecting babies in the later stages. We need to have a national centralized message around one policy. George W. Bush had this. It was all, when he was president and running for re-election, it was all about partial birth abortion bans. We need something very similar. We need the president and leadership in the Senate to do this and to talk about one central message. We want to limit late-term abortions and protect the babies where we can protect them now. We haven't had a centralized message because the pro-life leaders were all over the place. Some wanted a human life amendment. Others wanted a heartbeat. The reality is that politicians aren't going to go for a heartbeat. They might go for a 15-week. We saw heartburn over that when Lindsey Graham, Lindsey Graham, I think, introduced a 15-week limit a week after Dobbs. That was the right messaging. That was the right legislation to center around, and the other pro-life leaders didn't do it. But there are some really brave and courageous people like Marjorie Dannenfelser at the Susan B. Anthony list who weren't afraid to endorse a 15-week limit. It's just important that we do that. They weren't caught flat-footed. We just lacked a central message to go to. And by the way, Republicans didn't campaign or counter the abortion messaging in 2022, right? So you had this dynamic where Dr. Oz was accused of wanting to ban all abortions without exceptions. And he didn't respond by pointing out Fetterman's abortion extremism of no restrictions and no limits on abortion. He simply said he wasn't running on the pro-life issue. He didn't care about it. You have to address I think it was over around $500 million. It was like $450 million were spent in the election in 22, telling voters that Republicans were extremists and wanted to ban all abortions. Republicans didn't spend any money on campaign ads countering that. That can't happen. If I had $500 million and I accused a politician of wanting to, put fluoride in the water and brainwash everyone, I'm going to have an impact on the vote. It's just too much money to put in unresponded.
Yeah. People say this on all sorts of issues that we need to have a clear voice on it and then the voters will reward us for it. Well, sometimes they reward a clear voice on the issue with even more opposition. If is your recommendation that every person in a competitive Senate seat in the country should be running on a 15-week ban? I mean, that seems like they'd get all blown out of the water, if they're running in a Senate seat in Arizona or in Georgia or in a state like that. I mean, how exactly should the politics of this play out?
So how it plays out, look, I think the leading attack lines and leading campaign messages have to be the economy, safety, national security, and the family. But when it comes to what you're saying on the campaign trail, when you get attacked on abortion, you have to have a good and persuasive response. And saying, I'm not going to do anything on abortion is not a believable response. So what I would recommend for every candidate that's running, when you get attacked on abortion, clearly articulate where you would limit abortion to the voters and do it soundly and safely. I like talking about it, and I would clarify, these aren't abortion bans. We're still allowing abortions up until the 15th week. We're limiting abortion to the first 15 weeks. We aren't banning anything. We don't ban alcohol. We limit it to people over 21 years old. And I also think it's important right now to talk about having exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. So no, I wouldn't campaign on it. I wouldn't make a central point of my campaign. But when I get attacked on it, I am going to articulate my position clearly and forcefully and make sure that voters know, by the way, that it's the Democrats who support unrestricted access to abortion for no reason or any reason at all up until the moment of birth. And they want you to pay for it, the taxpayers.
Some of the most maximalist pro-lifers in the conservative movement are sometimes never Trumpers as well. And so there's a certain concern trolling that I sometimes see, which is that this adapted messaging is just, social conservatives and Christians selling their soul to the altar of Donald Trump, purely seeking power, and that they're not being principled. I guess this is more of a question for what goes on behind the scenes, because, there are some really genuinely motivated, often religious people inside this movement. I mean, what do those conversations look like when you're on this side urging practicality, and people are saying, like, no, this is a matter of heart and conviction. I cannot make a compromise with the world, with our political system on this. I mean, what do those conversations behind closed doors look like?
Well, the reality is that these people that are saying we need to completely ban abortion, they have no sense of reality. This is a democracy. People get to vote. And if you campaign on things that they don't want, they vote against you and you have no power. You have to have power before you can get anything done. And if you want to talk about, banning all abortions, that's great, but you're not going to get power to change anything. The abolitionist movement, right? When we were ending slavery, there were lots of compromises made. It was a methodical, step-by-step approach to limiting the power of the slaveholders. And we have to have a very similar strategy here if we're ever going to protect the unborn. You're not in reality. Democracy is about the people. If the people don't support something, you're not going to get power if you run on it. And this is something that a lot of people feel very strongly about. I don't understand why we wouldn't take the gains and protect the babies that we have right now. The house is on fire. And it's how I view this is, if you had a house on fire and there are 10 kids inside and you can only save 3, why would you let the whole house burn down and all 10 kids get killed when you can save those 3 kids? Let's save the 3 kids and then figure out if there's a way to save the rest. This is not an all or nothing approach. It cannot be. It can't be. And if you're going to have that mindset, well, you're going to lead to a lot more babies being killed than you realize.
That's all fair points. Going to a territory where we're having a lot more success as a movement right now. Give us the 10,000 foot view state of play of the transgender fight right now. I got my start in politics in 2015 when, I was working in a Texas legislature, and the Texas Republican Speaker of the House said that he would be unwilling to protect men and women's bathrooms because he did not want the lives of trans kids on his hands. So it feels like we've come a long way from that. Give us an overview of how the state of play is looking right now.
Well, look, Saurabh, I think that's a very accurate assessment. After Oberga fell, it seemed like the pro-family movement had lost. It seemed like the left was on track to add gender identity to our civil rights law, which would be an absolute catastrophe, obviously. But we got smart. We hunkered down. There were a few bad years. Pat McCrory obviously lost. I haven't really told this story very often, but after Pat McCrory lost in 2016,
Pat McCrory was the North Carolina governor who, what was it, SB2 in that state?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Pat McCrory signs this bathroom bill into law, and he ends up losing that race by 10,000 votes. I drove down to meet with him in Charlotte to figure out what exactly happened and what he thought went wrong. And what he told us is that before he signed that bill into law, he had all these pro-family religious right leaders approaching him, telling him, do the right thing. We've got your back. Just do the right thing and we'll protect you. He said, Terry, I signed the bill into law. I got nothing. No one ran campaign ads. No one did mailers. I got a bus tour, which, by the way, a bus tour is about PR and getting the media to write about your initiative. So guess what? When the bus tour came in, it just reinforced the narrative that HB2, the bathroom bill, was leading PayPal and the NCAA to boycott the state and was costing the state billions of dollars in revenue. It was a disaster. But then here's where it gets interesting. He told the story about how Chad Griffin, who at the time was president of the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest LGBT group in the country, Chad Griffin came into his office the week after he signed the bill into law, and he said, listen, just want to let you know how this is going to go down. We're going to make you the George Wallace of transgender rights, and no one is ever going to touch another bathroom bill again. We're collecting a scalp. And he also, this is where it gets interesting. He said, we're coming for Mike Pence too. Mike Pence caught lightning in a bottle and got plucked up to be the VP that year. So he got saved, and McCrory was the scalp. And it actually hurt the movement so bad because you had even conservative heroes like Matt Bevin in Kentucky said, I'm not touching that. We know which bathrooms to use in Kentucky. We don't need to do this. You fast forward, and I think the big opening, Saurabh, was a few things. One, the polling on across the board and all this gender identity, transgender stuff was off the charts for Republicans, for the conservatives. No one wanted men and women's bathrooms. No one wanted men and women's sports. But the key was finding out the issue that politicians were willing to talk about. And the women's sports angle was the opening. Politicians on the Republican side wanted to be champions for women. They're always looking to be, feminist champions where they can. And the women's sports angle was the perfect opening. So we started running campaign ads showing Republicans how to message on this and how to go on offense. And what do you know? It exploded. Donald Trump started championing it. And in a few short years.
And APP was, not the exclusive, but was a prime mover in this space. I remember reading about it at the time. Like, you guys paved the way.
Well, we were the first ones to put it into politics. We were the first ones to use it actually in campaigns and elections. There were a lot of great partners that we worked with that helped me develop our ads and get the facts right so that we could message properly. But where we innovated things was we injected into politics. And it's primarily because we don't look at politics as separate from the culture. We look at politics as part of the culture. And that's unique, I think, to America. A lot of other nations aren't like that. But because everyone gets to vote here, politics is part of our culture. It's a way to start conversations and build allies. And what happened was when we started putting millions of dollars into the campaigns and elections for and against candidates, politicians responded. Mm-hmm. And in a few short years, we were already up to 25 states protecting women's sports and keeping men out of it. And on top of that, it wasn't just that. We got 25 states to protect kids from these gender mutilation surgeries.
So on the women's sports thing, when folks are talking behind the scenes about this stuff, they're on side on the transgender issue, but they're like, come on, really? Republicans are becoming women's sports strongest soldier. Title IX, which is, a invention of the left 50 years ago. Suddenly that's the thing. I mean, it's the classic line, it's like, Democrats are the real transphobes in like 20 years. Like, defend yourself from people who say this is all kind of lame.
Well, listen, I do support Title IX. I think it's fair. I think women do deserve their own athletic opportunities. And if we're going to be having, educational opportunities for both men and women, we have to make sure that there's fairness. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, civil rights, there were a lot of Republicans that supported civil rights law. There wasn't that much opposition. It was actually mostly Southern Democrats. But the reality is that this was a prime opportunity to go after Democrats. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the reason what we're taking advantage of actually is the lies of the left. The left was never about actually advancing the rights of women. What they were about in reality was erasing the differences between men and women. Judith Butler is very clear about this. She said, we need to use gender to destroy gender. They're progressives. They look at all of these differences between us, between men and women, as social constructs that need to be destroyed for full equality and full prosperity and flourishing. And we are taking advantage of that. It was a lie. The Democrats never actually supported equality for women. They wanted to destroy men and take them down a notch to where there was no difference. That's why we're at the point where we're talking about putting women into the draft. I mean, for crying out loud, that's where full equality now goes, is women getting turned into hamburger meat on the battlefield. That's not what the goal of the original suffragettes was. They just wanted to have a voice. But going back to this, Republicans are being smart. They're taking advantage of where Democrats are craziest. They are building a narrative that if this is an election, like Sarah Huckabee said, this is an election about crazy versus normal. These are radicals. They actually think that men can become women and women can become men, that men can have periods, that men can have babies, and that women should get turned into hamburger meat on the battlefield in Ukraine, right? This is absolutely insane, and Republicans are smart to take advantage of it.
You mentioned two different things that you guys have had a lot of legislative success on. One is protecting women's sports. The other is gender mutilation of children. Talk me through those legislative fights. You know, is it just red states that are passing these? Is this something that's actually getting traction in more swingy purple places? What does the actual map and battlefield look like?
So on the issue of protecting kids online from porn, it's actually a very purple issue. In fact, most of the opposition in the early stages of the online verification fight was from Republicans. Republicans were worried about government censorship, government control, Big Brother, all of that. They had these really stupid, but sound bites that they would talk about. Oh, well, we can't define what porn is. Well, that's crazy, because we do a really good job of keeping porn off of broadcast television. There must be some definitions of obscenity in our FCC code that we can use to apply to the internet. The other thing that they said, which was really stupid, was we don't have the technology to do this. What are we talking about here? We do this with online gambling, tobacco, online alcohol sales. We do age verification for every other adult industry except for porn. So we had to overcome those obstacles with Republicans, but we saw in the Virginia House, for example, in the Senate, there were only 3 legislators that voted against this. Republicans and Democrats are united on this. Now, where it's not passing is it's not passing in a lot of blue states, but that's just because it's not a priority for Democrats. But where Republicans can get this introduced, like Virginia, like Louisiana, a Democrat governor signed that age verification law, and I think they were the first state in the country to actually do that. And so this is a bipartisan issue. It's not like the gender mutilation fight. The gender mutilation fight is partisan for the time being. But as more and more detransitioners come out of the woodwork, who were fooled into this as children and even as adults, you're going to start to see a lot more Democrats come on board, pumping the brakes. We're seeing left-wing politicians and leaders in Europe, like the UK, they're now opposing these gender mutilation surgeries, especially as it pertains to minors. And so it's only a matter of time before it reaches critical mass here in the United States. But what I'm most concerned about, Saurabh, on the gender mutilation fight to protect kids from this stuff is centering this around parental consent, right? First of all, the polling on banning these surgeries outright is off the charts. It's a 46% margin in Wisconsin, for example, which is a very purple state. And to have a 46% margin in support of what you're pushing, we shouldn't take that lightly. We should take advantage of that. But even when you center it around, when you phrase it as should children be allowed to get sex change procedures if they have the consent and permission of their parents, it's still not a majority in support of that. A majority of Americans oppose giving kids sex changes. And it's very simple logic, right? If parents can't consent to sexually abusing their children, they certainly can't consent to sexually mutilating their children. And that's what this fight needs to be about. It needs to be about protecting children from being sexually mutilated. And by the way, what else is coming out? We just released this groundbreaking report about the transgender industry. People have been trying to frame this in the media as a civil rights fight. It's not. They're masking it as a civil rights fight. It's an industry. It's a $4.4 billion industry, but they don't want to stop there. We have leaders in the transgender industry who are saying, if we can transition all 1.3 million transgender identifying people in America, this will be a $200 billion industry. That's bigger than the film industry. This is what they want to do. They want to transition everyone they can. They want to confuse these kids in schools. We need to frame this entire debate about protecting children from this stuff, because that's where their opportunities are. These, kids still believe in Santa Claus, for crying out loud. They're going to go along with whatever their teachers are pushing on them.
So the discrepancy there is, between the people who say, actually, you just shouldn't be allowed to transition a kid, period, versus, these incredibly egregious cases where kids are being transitioned at school without the parents knowing. And, the moderate solution would be just, well, you have to inform, the parents have to be okay with it. But again, we don't allow parents to sexually abuse their children, even if they, give consent or whatever. And so it makes no sense that we would allow them to do this. What about extending the fight one step further? I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that a lot of these procedures are not consonant with the Hippocratic Oath. I mean, should the transgender surgery be allowed in general? I remember this really funny New Yorker article from like the early 2000s that talks about this cottage and these patients that go to doctors asking to have limbs amputated. Mm-hmm. Like, I want my knee amputated, I want my arm amputated, and how it is a violation of the oath of the medical profession in order to do that. Is Is that where the territory of argument should be? Is that maybe these procedures aren't valid at all?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So first and foremost, I think the two ways to kill this industry are, one, to federally ban it across the country for minors. Anyone under 18 it should be a felony for anyone to perform a sex change procedure on anyone under 18. But then if you want to protect adults from this, all you have to do is open up the medical liability. And we're already seeing lawsuits come out the woodwork of people that have detransitioned. They felt like they were pushed into this. Many of these states, like Tim Walz's Minnesota, they've banned what they call gender identity conversion therapy, which basically is helping kids and adults feel comfortable in their own bodies and accept their own bodies.
I.e., if a therapist says anything other than, oh, you feel like a girl today, that's awesome, then they're in jail.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, we have this weird contradiction from the left where they're against conversion therapy for talking to people and helping, talk through their issues, but they'll totally convert your gender and your body for you. Right. Yeah. And so we have to open up the medical malpractice laws on these guys. And we're already seeing that. But once you start to win some lawsuits and once the trial attorneys start to smell blood in the water, this industry will go the way of lobotomies. And in fact, lobotomies are not illegal to perform in America. It's the medical liability that shuts these things down. And so if we can increase the exposure to the transgender industry from these lawsuits, you'll have this thing be over in the middle of the night because no one benefits from a sex change procedure. You might have some temporary, mental relief, but you're going to realize very soon that you were lied to, you were taken advantage of in the worst possible way ever.
So when you guys go into a state that's about to have this legislative fight, just to boil it down to its most simple thing, like, obviously you have all the groups that are testifying for the bills to ban this stuff. What's the opposition? It's obviously these highly socially progressive groups like, the Trevor Project and all this stuff. But what are those, more sinister forces that people wouldn't expect opposing legislation?
It's anytime you see North Carolina equality, Kentucky equality, these are the groups that they're hiding behind, and their arguments are so nefarious. It's not even funny. What they basically say is that there's a trans genocide going on, and if we pass these laws, you will have more suicides. The reality is that every single bit of solid gold standard research shows that suicidality increases after someone goes through a gender transition. That's not me saying it. That's the math. That's the research. That's the data. Yeah. And so they're lying to the American people. They're scaring them. And, when they say trans genocide, it's not like, that's such a terrible thing to say when there's actual genocides going on. What they mean when they say transgenocide is you're not going to allow people to identify as other genders, which isn't true. No one cares how you dress. No one cares what names you go by. No one cares what pronouns you demand to be called by. What we care about is not allowing a huge billion-dollar industry to confuse our kids and mutilate them and rob them of the ability of ever having their kids, their own family and kids someday. So as we have to make sure that we're centering this debate around the best interests of children and using the data that shows that suicidality increases after these kids transition and the rate of regret is so bad that they lose track of the people that go through these transition procedures because they just fall off the face of the earth.
So that's one place we've been winning. You mentioned on the pornography fight. I mean, just talk me through what are the arguments that are made in these state legislatures when you guys are getting an age verification bill through? It seems like it happened all at once over the last 18 months, basically. What's that been like?
Well, there's been a mad dash. Right now, there are two cases before the Supreme Court. One is questioning whether or not the states can restrict these gender transition procedures. But then also there's a case before the Supreme Court on whether or not states can implement age verification and mandate it. The arguments against age verification are very shallow, and we've overcome them in most of the legislatures. It's all the same things. We can't define what porn is. Porn's protected by the First Amendment, which also isn't true. The First Amendment has never been used to actually protect obscenity, libel or
the
seditious
founders
libel.
would beat you upside the head if you tried to make that argument. What do you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and look, if you can't put it out in New York, in Times Square in the public, if you can't put it on television, then it's not protected by the First Amendment, right? It's very simple. And, the original decision with ACLU versus Reno that struck down age verification and the restrictions of porn online, one of the things that stood out to me was they said, we can regulate obscenity off of television and radio, but the internet is not as pervasive in our lives. It's that
What
absurd.
year was that?
That was 1997 when the
Okay.
fastest internet speed you could get, I think, was like 56K or 128 kilobytes a
It's
second.
like a Paul Krugman, take. It's like the internet's not going to have that much of an impact on our lives. All right, buddy. Yeah.
No, that's right. And so we've overcome this. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court really did America bad. They did our children a disservice. There's a whole generation now of people that have these weird sexual appetites because we've just let the porn industry run rampant. Mm-hmm. But we're winning. We have to take this nationally. The big hurdle that we're running into is we're going to quickly maximize the amount of states that are willing and able to pass this legislation in the states. So we have to go federal. There's no reason why kids in California should be able to access porn, but kids in Texas can't. We should protect all kids from this stuff. We all know it's bad. It's a self-evident truth that porn is bad for kids, and we need to protect them from it. And the other thing that keeps coming up that is parents need to do a better job of monitoring their children's online activity. I agree with that. I think parents do need to be more involved. But at the end of the day, we're not making money. Why should parents have to pay extra money every single month for filters because some guy is somewhere wants to be able to watch porn whenever he wants? The porn industry is making money on this. They need to be the ones to pay to clean up the pollution that they're putting out there. They need to be the ones making sure that there are safeguards in place. A lot of people say that it should be the internet service providers. We disagree. This onus needs to be on the people making money off of this and the people that are responsible for it. And the people that are responsible for it are the people paying for it and buying it and consuming it and the people producing it. Mm-hmm. Everyone else, I think the internet should be like a public park. It should be free and open. It should be like a city, right? There should be seedy ends of town, but you know what? You got to show your ID at least to get into the strip club. Mm-hmm. It's very simple. We don't have to overthink this with, garbage constitutional arguments that actually aren't based in any reality or history. But we just need to protect kids. Parents do need to step up. They do need to be more involved and more restrictive. Mm-hmm. But I think parents should be more restrictive overall screen time in general. It's not just porn we should be protecting our kids from. It's social media. We need to make sure that kids are outside more, playing with their friends, being more physically active. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot more problems than just, perversion. We're going to have obesity epidemic. We already have this stuff going on.
Yeah. Is it working? It's been very recent, so you might not have a ton of data yet, but the ingenuity of a 14-year-old boy is extreme. And it's not to say that a really motivated person being able to find it doesn't mean the policy is successful. It's about in aggregate is the amount of usage under the age of 18 going down. Do you have any data yet about that? Do we know if this is actually working?
Look, there's still porn available. So I live in Virginia and there are still some sites that don't comply with the law. Mm-hmm. They're foreign-owned sites, but this is why we need federal engagement. You can't base you can't make a judgment about the success of a law based on how, the percentage of people that are able to access it. You have to make it whether you have to build on these laws, right? That's how our legal system works. You pass legislation. If it's not perfect, you continue to reform and improve the law over the years. Mm-hmm. That's how every single law that we've ever passed has worked here. It's how civil rights laws work, and it's how protecting kids online is going to work. So you get started, you pass the basic restrictions and protections for children, and then when you find out where it's not working, well, then you revisit it and you add additional protections in the law. But you can't make an excuse that, well, we can't protect 100% of the people, so we can't pass anything. You've got to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it's like back to that abortion analogy. If you can save 3 kids in the burning down house, but not all 10, you don't just let the whole house burn down. You got to save the 3 kids or the 3 dads. You know what I mean? These laws actually keep a lot of adult grown men off of these sites because they don't want to upload their photo ID because they're worried, even though we haven't had any privacy issues in the States on this. But it's protecting not just children, it's protecting a lot of families as well.
Yeah. What do those next stages to refine and further concretize these laws look like? What kind of stuff are you guys looking to go back to the well on?
Well, the two big things that we want to do is take it federal. So we should have this enforced at the federal level through the FCC or through some type of
Do you
federal.
think there's any Senate Democrat interested in this right now?
I would be willing to bet we could find one or two. And I think that there's an opening there because of their exposure on all these crazy books that are in school, right? So if I'm a Democrat and I'm worried about being labeled as someone that's putting porn in kids' schools, well, what I would do is I would be the first person to introduce legislation for age verification online to say, hey, I'm against getting kids porn, and these are lies by my Republican opponent. I just introduced the legislation to protect kids from porn online and adult content and obscenity. So I do think there's openings. I would start with someone like, I don't know, Ron Wyden. There are other senators, I'm sure, that would be open to doing this, but someone that doesn't have to worry about reelection, I would start with them. But secondly, we have to take it federally, but also we have to crack down on these foreign porn sites because most of the porn sites are owned by a Canadian company called MindGeek, and we have to crack down on them. And we have to but this is again goes back to why we need federal enforcement. If the federal government's involved, you're going to have a lot of these international porn companies ceasing their behavior. But if they just have to go up against the state of California or the state of Texas or Mississippi or Alabama, they're not going to comply with it as quickly and as easily as they would if the federal government is doing it.
Yeah. The consequences of online pornography have been so much more extreme than the consequences of like Playboy magazines were 25 years ago. You guys have taken a pretty entrepreneurial approach to saying, actually, we should look at the entirety of modern digital life and how it's affecting children and the negative consequences there. And beyond the porn issue, which is obviously the most acute, what are some other elements of the digital dystopia it sometimes feels like we live in that you guys are trying to focus on and move policy forward on?
Well, the two other areas are social media. Obviously has a very, they design social media to be addictive, to sell you ads, but then also online privacy, right? We are allowing, these websites, these social media sites, the free email accounts, they're not giving it to you for free. They're selling you. They're selling your data. That belongs to you. And so we're looking at what we can do federally and nationally to protect our data and our privacy online. I would rather a situation where we pay for these services like cable than we allow for companies to continue to keep our data and sell it over and over and over again. We are not commodities to be bought and sold. Our data is us. We need to protect it. And some of the things, I don't know the legislation that we're getting behind right now. We're still developing that. But I would like to be able to have a situation or, a society where if you fill out a government form, like the do not call list, where you can opt out and get your data from these social media sites and they all have to comply and you can remove it. I think you should be able to go dark online. I don't think it's right that, just because you fill out some form online, that now anyone who wants to buy it can have your cell phone, your home address, everything they can find out about you. I don't think that's right. And so I think that we need to increase the protections, the data and privacy protections for everyday Americans. And I think it would be actually very popular because there's a sense, I get a lot of text messages asking for money for campaigns and different organizations. And I never gave them my data. Yeah. Someone did. Yeah. And I just don't think it's fair to just continually buy and sell data of other people. It's infringing on our rights. I mean, we spend way too much time on our phones, way too much time on screens. And a lot of it is because they've developed these addictive platforms that keep us coming back for more likes and more clicks and more adrenaline rushes.
One of the things that I've started to see is that schools have started enforcing no phones in school hours. Is that the kind of thing we should have legislation around? I mean, just like completely ban personal cell phones from elementary and middle schools and see what happens?
I think we need to ban cell phones. I think we need to ban all the iPads and the tablets. Look, if you look at the NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, only a third of our kids can read or do math at grade level. That's not acceptable. That's not the numbers they're having in China. That's not the numbers they're having in any of the competitor nations that we face. We have to get serious about protecting our kids. And, there was a survey a few years back. They did kids in China and then kids in America. Kids in China, the top 3 professions were like astronaut, scientist, doctor. The kids in America all wanted to be YouTube famous and TikTok famous. That's not a healthy society. We need to get back to basics. We need to realize that there's a real physical world that we need to be a part of. And if we keep going down this digital obsession, it's not going to be a very happy experience.
For our members only segment, I'm going to ask Terry to look out into the future and be a Cassandra about the coming threats to the family. If you would like to be a member, you can go to YouTube and search up American Moment. There you can find our YouTube channel where you can become a member. You can be either a truther or a statesman. That gets you these episodes 24 hours early, as well as access to these members only segments. Okay. If you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out. Terry, where can people keep up with everything APP is doing and follow you specifically?
So you can find me on social media. I'm on all the platforms at Schilling1776, but I would encourage all of your viewers to go to family.vote. That's where we're organizing, engaging everyone. Yeah, it's a great one, yeah. But we're mobilizing, organizing families and people that care about family and to go out to the polls and make sure that they vote for the people that are going to protect them and protect their kids. So family.vote. Schilling1776. We're always putting out fun stuff and we like to have a good time. We don't take ourselves too seriously. This is one of the rare times. I wore a tie for you.
I know, it's amazing.
I don't usually do that.
Square jacket. It's like, wow, you're better dressed than I am today.
I still got my sneakers on, so that counts.
It's unfortunate. That's why we're only top up here at this show. Terry, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Rob.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed taping it. I think Terry is one of the most sensible voices out there in the social conservative movement. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I believe that's the case. One, he's just significantly more politically savvy than a lot of the figures out there. And so I'm a political guy, a practical guy at the end of the day. So it's always nice to talk to someone who thinks that way as well. You can, of course, check out everything APP is doing at their website. I highly recommend that you do. They're a great organization. And Terry's been an incredible mentor and advisor on our board for many, many years. So we are always glad to have him on the show. Please rate and review this podcast. You can go to AmericanMoment.org to find all of the links. You can subscribe on YouTube in order to see the very high production value that we put into this. Our producers work tirelessly both to get this taped and then edited. They are very nice to me and don't get too angry with me when I keep them late like I am today. And be sure, as always, to go to AmericanMoment.org. Check out everything else we have cooking. We are in a very exciting season here at American Moment and very busy, but we're always glad to make the time to send this show out. Thank you guys, as always, for listening. We will see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.